Good morning, everyone. We have a number of people coming in as we speak, and we'll just get started. Welcome to day 3 of the Reimagining Climate Adaptation Summit. My name is Juan Salazar. I'm a professor at the Institute for Culture and Society at Western Sydney University and co-chair of Future Earth Australia's steering committee. For the past 15 years, I have lived on the riverbanks of the Cooks River, on unceded country of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and of the Darawal people of the Darawal Nation. For 20 years, I have worked in unceded Baramatigal country in Parramatta, and some of the campuses of our university are in the country of the Darug people of the Darug Nation. So I would like to start today by acknowledging the custodians, the traditional owners and knowledge holders of this country and their ancestors who have cared for the country, the land, the waters, the sky, the animals for tens of thousands of years. We pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, acknowledging them as the custodians of knowledge of this place and its beings, its natural resources, and recognizing always that this was, is, and always will be Aboriginal land. Yvonne Weldon, in her Welcome to Country to this event on day 1, invited us to remember Aboriginal warriors and ancestors, to reflect on our footsteps, to see where we're coming from in order to know where we're going, to reflect on place and how place is made out of relationships. And hence, I wish to acknowledge that the Western Sydney University campuses are located in areas where bloody frontier wars were fought, not far from where the resistance fighter Pemulwuy was shot dead in 1802, and not far from where the Appin massacre took place in 1816, on an April day like today, 3 days ago, on the 17th of April. The ICS at Western Sydney University is hosting you all today, and we're honored to have been invited to work with Diana O'Donnell, Eleanor Robson, and the Future Earth Australia team, and David Schlossberg and the Sydney Environment Institute team at the University of Sydney, in co-organizing this really important National Climate Adaptation Summit. I'd like to thank, as we start, my colleagues at the ICS with whom we are coordinating today's sessions, Louise Crabtree, Sally Burns, and Elise Blight. As David Schlossberg said in his opening on day 1, we got together as a group in response to the perilous state of political inaction on climate adaptation currently in Australia. We aim to convene back the diverse and dispersed climate adaptation communities across Australia to share perspectives and knowledge on making climate adaptation happen at the dawn of this new critical decade ahead in a context of a climate emergency and a global pandemic. As Diana O'Donnell has mentioned during the past 2 days, this summit is also the culmination of a nationwide consultation process that Future Earth Australia and its partners convened in 2020, with people in every state and territory to inquire as to how we might rethink adaptation in light of the deep transformation required in Australia's society and economy. What are our strengths, weaknesses, and how we can bring community knowledge and preferences into adaptation planning. This process led to a very important summary paper, which you can all see and download from our website. The 50 speakers presenting at this summit over 3 days have pretty much all emphasized the urgent need for coordination across sectors, the need to embrace and respect a diversity of ways of knowing, and also a diversity of ways of being and caring on this planet, the need for place-based action and an integrated systems approach, the need for Indigenous-led approaches. We seem to fail to recognize how often academics, politicians, activists, journalists reproduce apocalyptic narratives of the end of the world, which, despite the evidence and the science pointing in that direction, do entail problematic assumptions, not the least for not denouncing the colonial and racist implications of projecting only white futures, for maintaining the status quo, for continuing to invest in an imaginary of change still locked within a dominant neoliberal economic model that has fueled grotesque levels of injustice and inequality, as we have seen during this global COVID-19 pandemic. This is one reason why we chose to have day one as a day where the interventions were led by outstanding Indigenous women and men who are at the forefront of scholarship, activism, and climate adaptation practice, as well as by leading voices from Australian farmers working at the forefront of regenerative systems, food security, and agroecology. Again, local action is happening everywhere in Australia, in urban and rural areas, in all states, while the country's climate policy languishes in inertia. Bruce Pascoe, in his keynote, invited us to stay focused, to be patient, to be persistent. Not an easy task when a few days ago we hear a speech by the Prime Minister Scott Morrison to business leaders in Sydney, insisting that Australia needs to chart its own course and achieve its own aims through the best technology and the animal spirits of capitalism. Fairly at odds with the strong message coming out of our conversations over the past 3 days. Now that the United States is putting forward a no binding emissions reduction goal to 2030, and growing pressure mounts across Australia from a range of communities, businesses, young people, and professional thinkers, as Bruce Pascoe called us on day one, we shall see for how long climate action will continue to be hijacked as a threat by conservative forces, denialism, and racism in this country. Yesterday's keynote by former Chilean Minister for the Environment and World Bank advisor, Marcelo Mena, gave us a glimpse of how a much smaller country than Australia, such as Chile, already has a fairly solid plan for net zero emissions for 2050, based on renewables and not on CCS technology. And while 2050 might be way too late, at least it shows a serious attempt to look for opportunities for a green recovery and a more just and solidary economic recovery within dominant transition models. Some of the topics were picked up in our sessions yesterday, where we looked at a range of perspectives on financing and tackling risks, as well as frameworks to enable adaptation success, which we'll revisit today as well, starting with our distinguished keynote speaker coming up in 5 minutes. The overall focus of today's sessions is on imagining thriving futures, with the first session following our keynote by the Minister Lily D'Ambrosio on climate adaptation futures, which will touch on, among many topics, on the aftermath of the 2020 bushfire emergency in southeastern Australia. This will be followed by a session on adaptation at scale to finish the day with a session on transitions and transformation. As has been the case in every session during the past 2 days, the panelists will speak for 10 minutes each. This will be followed by a brief moderated panel discussion, and each session will end up with 15 minutes with questions from the audience. Today's presenters are speaking from Western Australia, the Northern Territory, Victoria, the ACT, Queensland, and New South Wales. A reminder that this is a national summit in its intent. We're honored to have the participation of remarkable political leaders, with an opening keynote, as I said, by the Honourable Lily D'Ambrosio, Victorian Minister for Energy, Environment and Climate Change, and later on interventions by the Mayor of Blue Mountain City, Councillor Mark Greenhill, and Councillor Declan Clausen, Deputy Lord Mayor of the City of Newcastle. Importantly, speakers in today's sessions also include Australia's top academics in the field. Professor Mark Howden, Director of the Institute for Climate, Energy and Disaster Solutions at ANU, my apologies, who has been Vice Chair of the IPCC, and in 2007 shared the Nobel Peace Prize with other IPCC participants and Al Gore. Professor Jean Palutikoff from Griffith University, who over a decade led the world-class National Climate Change Adaptation Research Facility that was defunded last year. Professor Leslie Head from University of Melbourne, President of the Australian Academy of the Humanities, Professor Petra Chakert from the University of Western Australia, also a coordinating lead author for a special report for the IPCC, Sophie Weber from the University of Sydney. This exceptional lineup of speakers also includes senior economists and experienced business and industry leaders, including Dr. Russ Weiss, Principal Sustainability Economist at CSIRO in Canberra, Mr. Joe Morrison, Chief Executive Officer of the Indigenous Land and Sea Corporation, and a highly respected Indigenous leader, and Mr. David Tucker, Chief of Infrastructure Assessment at Infrastructure Australia. We are most proud and honored also to be able to close the day with two outstanding community leaders and change makers. Scott Hickman, a grazier on Oatley, an 800-hectare property in Canowindra, central western New South Wales, and Hilary Montague, co-campaigns director of the Australian Youth Climate Coalition. Hopefully you can stay tuned for the whole day. If not, be reminded that we're recording these sessions so you can come back at your own time. Enough from me. Now to our distinguished opening keynote from the Honourable Lily D'Ambrosio. Minister D'Ambrosio is a member from the Australian Labor Party and has represented the electorate of Mill Park in the Victorian Legislative Assembly since 2002. In 2016, she became Minister for Energy, Environment and Climate Change and Minister for Suburban Development. And on the recent return of the Andrews Labor government, she was appointed Minister for Energy, Environment and Climate Change and Minister for Solar Homes. Minister D'Ambrosio is a leader in action on climate change, renewable energy and energy efficiency in Australia. She oversaw the passage of the Climate Change Act, Victoria's landmark climate legislation, which saw it become the first Australian state to legislate in line with the Paris Agreement for net zero emissions by 2050. The minister has also overseen an overhaul of the Environmental Protection Act of 1970, refocusing the regulatory body to focus on the prevention of harm to human and environmental health. She is a leading advocate for a modernized Australian energy system that facilitates a smooth transition into a clean, reliable, and affordable energy future. Minister, thank you so very much. We're honored to have you with us today. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Professor, for your very warm welcome. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered today. And where I am located is the home of the Wurundjeri people. And my respects go to all elders, past, present, emerging, and any who may be joining with us here today. And certainly I would also like to acknowledge Future Earth Australia, the Sydney Environment Institute at the University of Sydney, and the Institute for Culture and Society at Western Sydney University for making this event possible. Day 3 of the summit invites us to imagine thriving futures. And in a world where a lot of the language is about urgency and emergency, it is very important for us to not forget the absolute imperative of imagining a future that is a good future, one that we can all look forward to. So today is a fantastic opportunity for us to connect, to share our experiences, exchange knowledge and innovative ideas as we adapt to a changing climate. A robust approach to adaptation is very vital, of course, to building community resilience and securing a healthy and prosperous future for all Australians. And the big challenge, of course, is ensuring that communities or localities are not left behind in this conversation. This morning, I want to share with you how Victoria is addressing the human dimension and systemic nature of climate change adaptation. As, of course, the world grapples with urgent environmental and climate issues, adapting to climate change will be crucial. Our government is delivering strong and lasting action on climate change for the Victorian community. We are already experiencing the changes to our climate with higher average temperatures and less cool season rainfall. And this is only going to become, of course, more challenging as climate change becomes even more pressing, with significant impacts on biodiversity, increases in fire danger and sea level rises. Through Victoria's Climate Change Adaptation Plan that I released in 2017, we have already demonstrated our commitment to adaptation action on climate change. And that plan was a 3-year plan. This is what we've already been able to demonstrate. Developing local scale climate projections for the whole of Victoria to help us understand what our future climate will be like out to the 2090s for moderate and high emissions scenarios. Completing a vulnerability assessment on the economic impacts of heat waves on Victoria. Addressing heat in the urban environment to support cooler green city spaces through urban heat vulnerability mapping and tree mapping. Launching a marine and coastal policy to deliver a healthy, dynamic and biodiverse marine and coastal environment. And working in partnership with traditional owners to undertake the Aboriginal Waterways Assessment to enable us to better understand waterway and wetland health. We also provide up-to-date climate change science and local scale projection data for all Victoria to build a detailed understanding of exposure to potential risks and impacts. However, of course, this is just the start, with our Climate Change Act providing the next stage in driving adaptation in Victoria. Our world-leading Climate Change Act is the centrepiece of our approach to climate change, and it's the strongest climate change legislation in the country. It plays a crucial role in positioning Victoria as a leader in climate change action. It provides a foundation to manage climate change risks, maximise the opportunities that arise from decisive action, and drive our transition to a climate resilient community and economy. This is vital because we know that while climate change is a huge global concern, responding to it presents opportunities for us in Victoria to improve our productivity and competitiveness, to create new jobs, stimulate investment in low carbon industries like renewable energy. Through the Climate Change Act, we have set a target of net zero emissions by 2050, and that is in law. The next step is for us to set our emissions reduction targets to 2030. These are what we have obliged on us as a Victorian government, to set interim emissions reduction targets so that we are not just waiting till 2 minutes to midnight, if you like, on the eve of 2050 to realise that there is still so much to be done. So as part of our interim targets, we'll be releasing our sector pledges, which will include a sector pledge for transport, energy, waste, industrial processes, land use and agriculture. I look forward to having more to say about those sector pledges and, of course, our interim emissions targets very, very soon. And that will be accompanied by our climate change strategy. That is imminent, in fact. So our climate change strategy will set the scene for a new integrated approach to adaptation under the Climate Change Act of 2017, developing adaptation action plans for Victoria. These adaptation plans will be a system-based approach to adaptation that will build the state's resilience and help Victorians plan for the inevitable impacts of climate change. They will focus on key systems that are either vulnerable to the impacts of climate change or essential to ensuring Victoria is prepared for a changing climate. These are 7 systems, and they are the built environment, primary production, education and training, health and human services, the natural environment, the water cycle, and the transport system. The first round of 5-yearly adaptation action plans is due late this year. These plans will help us target our responses to climate change risks, so they reflect each system's unique needs and challenges. We will open all 7 draft adaptation action plans for public consultation middle of this year. We recognise, however, that climate change impacts are and will be felt differently across Victoria. And that is why we are committed to helping communities, individuals, organisations to work together through a place-based and values-led approach to adaptation that complements the system-based planning. This is about ensuring, as I said earlier, that we not leave anybody behind. Classes of people, particular localities, it is critical for us to move forward as one. 6 regional adaptation strategies are currently under development across Victoria, supported by government, but led and owned by regional communities. A $9.3 million supporting our regions to adapt program is supporting this process and funding greater local action by elevating adaptation issues and barriers that are better addressed at a regional level. By linking statewide and local level work, regional adaptation planning is intended to provide a more complete picture of adaptation needs and priorities across the state and a more complete suite of actions. Themes emerging from this place-based work recognise that adaptation priorities and needs are diverse, and therefore community-led and place-based responses are required. Community engagement and collaboration needs to be diverse, inclusive, and be built on genuine partnerships. And that climate change exacerbates existing vulnerabilities. Therefore, policy and support mechanisms need to address this equitably. The regional adaptation strategies will be released in 2021. 7 regions currently have drafts on the Engage Vic platform or regionally specific websites inviting public feedback. And I encourage all of you to have a look at those. Our exciting and innovative raft of policies and programs will help us reach our goal of a net zero emissions and climate resilient Victoria by 2050, whilst supporting a just transition. We know that it requires a combined effort from government, business, community, industry, and academia to get us there. So I want to thank you all for the fantastic work that you do each and every day, the contributions that you are making, and the leadership you are demonstrating at this pivotal time. So thank you again, and I hope that you enjoyed the rest of the summit and make use of what you learn and share here to further benefit all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And as I said before, your presence in our summit is really important to have the support of political leaders like yourself. And it's very good to see, to hear a summary of what the Victorian government is doing and adopting a systems approach where we think it's exactly what's needed, an approach that is based on cooperation, a dialogue of knowledges, a dialogue of ways of approaching, this. We're going to go into some questions from the audience. I just had a question that is tricky for all of us, which is we can see how the Victorian government is leading the way in climate policy and as well, in climate action, climate adaptation action. But the environment has no boundaries. There's no boundary between Victoria and New South Wales and South Australia. There's no boundary between Australia and Indonesia or, the big polluting countries from the global north. So how can we do it to design policy and action for a region like Victoria, but when the environment is necessarily not respecting those, human boundaries? So how can we? It's a tricky question, but I'd like to get your opinion as an expert and as a minister.
Thank you very much, Professor. And look, it is an absolutely important question. I would though suggest that the reverse of that can be also a very problematic point, because often those who choose and leaders who choose not to do anything on climate change often refer to the notion that, well, Australia is only a small contributor to the global problem, and that is a cop-out, and of course everyone here would agree that it is a cop-out. I think absolutely you are right, but at the end of the day, moving together and getting onto the one trajectory of change and the need for change has proven very, very difficult globally. We know that. Nevertheless, through strong ambition and leadership in whichever setting that can be managed, needs to just go ahead, because that leadership is what demonstrates to others that may be perhaps somewhat more timid or have particular political problems in being able to take the necessary steps. It shows the way of what can be done. And whilst we will always work, and I will always work at a national level, for example, to achieving bigger steps, where very little comes from that national level, it remains incumbent on us as a state, a jurisdiction, and myself as a minister to do all we can to move the agenda forward and to demonstrate what strong leadership and ambition can produce. So it is a very important question. But the reality is we need to deal with these things at 2 or 3 different levels. One, what is it that we can achieve, and set ourselves very strong ambition within the frameworks that we can control, and continue to advocate very strongly at national and global levels for further action.
Thank you, Minister. We'll go into some of the questions from the audience, and then we can come back to our conversation. First up, we have a question from Eleanor Robson. She says, thanks for your talk, Minister. How are the place-based work for adaptation linking into a broader coordination strategy across the state? We've been speaking quite a bit about the difficulty of coordination without clunky centralization. So it'd be great to hear your views on that.
Thank you, and that is a really important question, and we have to, and what drives our broad agenda in terms of adaptation and resilience across regions in Victoria is to very much leave it not as to their own devices, but leave the identification and the solutions to be managed or identified by those local regional communities. They live where they live. They know the impacts of climate change as they are now. Understanding what the impacts of climate change will be on, according to a variety of scenarios, will enable them, and does enable them, to identify, well, how do we become more resilient within our own communities? What resources can we bring together at a regional level to give us that greater resilience? What is left for us to seek further assistance from a state, or indeed a Commonwealth, to add to that increased resilience? And so community-driven is absolutely at the centre of our climate change adaptation planning. And that will also, of course, help to inform future funding decisions from our government to enable the realisation or the implementation of those resilience and adaptation plans.
Thank you, Minister. The next question follows up from the first one, and I think you have partly responded to that, but I'll make it anyway in case you would like to expand. It's from Claudia Munera, and she asks whether, or has the Victorian government found barriers from the federal level to implement climate change and adaptation policies?
Well, yes, indeed, there have been many, and the Commonwealth government is still grappling with climate change as a concept to be accepted, but to demonstrate, more importantly, what does ambition, what does it need to look like for Australia? We have an obligation as a country in a global setting to demonstrate strong leadership. We are a wealthy country. Our economic well-being, if you simply have a look at how we've managed the COVID epidemic and the continuing pandemic and the challenges there, we are far better off than so many countries globally. That speaks to the strength of our systems, notwithstanding there have been a number of challenges, of course, but it speaks to the strength of our systems. It speaks to our capability to create economic buffers against the most telling and forceful challenges to our way of living and our economic and health and well-being. Why can't we do that with climate change? Of course we can do it. Of course we can do it. And we should be doing it. So I'm hoping that answers the question with a little bit of passion in the answer. But the barriers remain there, but the barriers are of a political invention rather than real physical or economic barriers, if you like. We have the potential, we have the capability, and we have the resources to play the leadership role that is incumbent on us as a wealthy nation.
Thank you, Minister. We appreciate your candid response. The next one is from Mark Stafford Smith. He says, thanks for a great approach in the combination of system and regional plans. How are you approaching challenges of retreat from sea level rise or fire or flooding where needed?
Excuse me. Excuse me. Well, certainly many of the regional plans and also our policy on marine and coastal, our new legislation, which sets very clear climate framework parameters, gives us the tools to be able to better respond to those challenges. And some of those challenges are not always just about money. Challenges can include, how do we deal with living along very close to coastal areas, along waterways and the like. And so, of course, our journey has really only just begun to deal with those really critical questions that have to be owned by communities that live in those areas with the appropriate support of their elected governments, whether it's local, state or federal. Not going to be easy conversations, absolutely, but I know that Victorians understand that it's not easy. But we have established that legislative framework. We have put some funds into, again, as I said, the adaptation planning, but further work, of course, is on the horizon.
The next question by Josh Stevens asks, what is your biggest concern regarding Victoria's adaptation? Equally, what are you most excited or enthusiastic about? What are you most excited or enthusiastic about?
Thank you. In terms of my greatest concern, and this is really, I mean, there's a number of them, of course, because we know that the impacts of climate change are multifaceted, from the health of our communities, that is actual people health. We know that heat waves actually cause more deaths than bushfires, although bushfires themselves cause a whole range of other health impacts on our biodiversity. And both of those have very, very strong causal links that is traced to climate change. We know that. In a high emissions scenario by 2030, Victoria will likely see a doubling of extreme heat events to one a year, double from that to what we've got now. You can imagine the health impacts on individuals who have very poor thermal comfort in their homes, right through to, of course, the greater pressure on our biodiversity. So these are very critical. I mean, areas in Victoria, you know, are they going to be at risk of being too hot to be able to live in? How do we manage all of that? There's a real risk that I'm seeing right now, because we're actually feeling them and seeing them right now. And that helps to drive our policy and our investments. So if you have a look at in November, when we produced our state budget, and like most states, because of COVID, it was a late budget, but nevertheless, you know, we are rolling out 250,000 split heating and cooling systems to those that are most vulnerable. That serves two purposes. One, of course, is to help those that just don't have that decent thermal comfort in their home, and give them, you know, the best opportunity possible, or to help contribute to that, to be able to not just survive, but be comfortable. But also it helps to swap out a lot of appliances that are very heavy on emissions. So gas heating is a really big challenge here in Victoria, more so than other states. Our state has got the greatest use of domestic gas than any other state, and that's because of historic abundance, if you like, of offshore gas close to us here. So those two things are very important for us. In terms of, I think, the other more positive side of the question, the things that I am absolutely most confident about or looking forward to, I'm absolutely confident that we can decarbonise our energy system way ahead of 2050. Now, electricity, of course, is going to be much easier to an extent, although there are challenges in terms of localised impacts. We know that, and Victoria is absolutely has those challenges when it comes to, for example, the Latrobe Valley and the jobs and the communities that exist there. Nevertheless, it is something that we as a government are already demonstrating our bona fides in. We've well and truly overshot our 25% renewable energy target last year. In the first few months of this year, we were producing around 30% of our electricity needs from renewable energy. 50% by 2030, chances are, you know, that might be more than that, because we are not going to let up on the right policies that attracts the investment, grows the jobs, and grows those that new energy source for our state. So absolutely confident on that, and I know that we can make big inroads in the decarbonisation of our transport system. Agriculture is always a big challenge because we need more science and R&D, but I'm very confident that the next 5 to 10 years will demonstrate and will bring forward many solutions that may actually not be visible or apparent to us right now. So I have a lot of confidence that we can do very, very well in meeting the obligations that we set ourselves, and improving, and being able to take communities with us is very, very critical, whether it's about the new jobs that will be created, but also understanding and working on the local benefits that strong action on climate change can be, if you like, shared by regional communities in particular.
It's interesting that some of this push for decarbonization was also tackled by our keynote yesterday, the former Environment Minister for Chile and advisor to the World Bank, Marcelo Mena. So it's a critical aspect of these discussions, is to hear political leaders like yourself really betting on the possibility of decarbonizing, for instance, the transport system. He was mentioning how in the city of Santiago, 10% of the public buses are now electric, and that wants to grow to 50% by 2030 and 100% by the following decade. So it's such an important move. We have two further questions which are similar, and again, you have partly responded to them, but I'll make them anyway in case you want to take the conversation in a different way. One is by Bob Webb, and he says, the minister mentioned a systems approach is being taken to adaptation and 7 very key systems. There are also very significant adaptation interactions between these systems that require coordination across individual government, agency, and sector silos, which often proves a problem. Any views on how this can be tackled? And the similar question by Katrina Graham is what is the role of local government and how are they being supported to increase their climate governance so they can meet community expectations based on their jurisdictional roles and responsibilities.
Yes, thank you. And that is a very important question about the challenges of bureaucracy. And I use the word bureaucracy not in a pejorative sense. Governments and elected people need great, fantastic public service, bureaucracy to deliver agenda and to drive it and to inform it. Certainly in Victoria, we recognised very early on when we were developing our climate change offering, including legislation, and we decided very early on that there is where you need a whole of government approach to tackling significant matters within an economy or in a community, which involves a whole range of portfolio areas that it was best placed for us to actually give leadership to the particular ministers in those areas. So it's not just about what is Lily D'Ambrosio doing to make sure that we are doing all we can in terms of the agriculture sector for its resilience into the future, or ways of mitigating climate change impacts through some of their practices. And so our legislation articulates the responsibilities, the legislative responsibilities by ministerial portfolio areas. And that in itself helps to drive that whole of government breaking down of silos approach to tackling climate change. Each minister is incumbent on delivering on their part of the agenda, the program. Now, in terms of local government, I'm very keen and have been keen to work with local governments. We invited them some time ago to provide, and it's an option for them to provide to a central system their own climate change mitigation and adaptation work. And that is really to help to incentivise and encourage them to do that. And we can compare how councils are moving in that direction. I think more information that is shared means that councils that perhaps are doing very well can share what they are doing well with other municipalities. And of course, it works in reverse, where those that perhaps would like to do more and should be encouraged to do more can learn from others. One example of where we are making some big inroads is in the waste and recycling system. Food organics, green organics. Some people will may be shocked to know that the system of managing our waste, and let's focus on the high emitting green and food organics, has not had a lot of strong legislative foundation. So through custom over many decades, local governments have had that role. There is actually, up until very soon, when I'm going to be introducing legislation at the end of the year, there's been really no direct legislative role for state governments. So we set very strong targets in our Recycling Victoria strategy, a circular economy strategy, a 10-year strategy, and set a target of cutting the amount of organics material going to landfill by half by 2030, but also incentivising councils by requiring food and green organics bin at the curbside in the homes. And now many councils are actually moving faster than what we'd actually said to them we would like to see them move, which is really terrific. So we're supporting them to do that. And our objective is to have every household in the state by or no later than, I think it might be 2027 or 29, I'm sorry, the date escapes me just yet, to have a FOGO service either at the curbside where the street allows, but in those remote communities to actually have a service available to them which may look a little bit different. So that's a very important collaborative approach that councils have, on the whole, in general, have been demonstrated and have indicated very strong support for. A lot more that needs to be done, absolutely. I'd like to some councils to move just beyond declaring a climate emergencies. Some of them actually need to articulate stronger policies and take communities with them, but very keen, and we will definitely be working with them on other initiatives.
Thank you. And it's good that in the session coming afterwards, we will hear from the mayor of Blue Mountain City, where they have declared a climate emergency, but are also walking the walk, as you just said. We have one final question, I think, from Anissa Madden. She says, thank you for your talk, Minister. I'm interested in the role of youth in reimagining and enacting thriving futures. How is the Victorian government supporting rural and urban youth education, training, and political leadership? And how are you working with youth to meet the goals you've spoken about today?
Look, thank you. Young people will keep us all honest, and that is not to discredit any single one of us in what our objectives are, but they are the ones who will continue to deal with the consequences of climate change well past our own use-by dates. So it's a fantastic question. In Victoria, we are working with young people at a variety of levels. One of those is a program that is existing in Victoria for a long time, and we call that Resource Smart Schools, where Sustainability Victoria, which is an important government agency here that is well trusted and respected across the state, engages and provides a program and school curriculum information resources for schools that choose to be part of the Resource Smart Schools initiative. And that is available to primary school level, but also secondary school. And typically, the schools, typically headed by very passionate teachers, will identify a series of projects or initiatives in the local school community. It could be about waste and recycling. It could be about looking after their immediate natural environment, if they have a setting as such, or indeed growing their own food for their own school kitchen. There's a number of initiatives that are out there that very much are driven by the individual schools. And the number of schools that I visit and hear from, the students are very, very inspiring, because they are very clear in their understanding of climate change, and they're also very clear about the steps that need to be taken and the urgency of those steps. So we are supporting them. That is one example of that support. We also have a system here in Victoria where we have what is called regional partnerships. Regional partnerships are forums or assemblies across, as it's clear in the title, across the regions, where a whole range of communities will come together. And that includes, of course, in regional Victoria, we have metropolitan partnerships, we have regional partnerships. Often schools and school leaders will come to those forums, and the idea of those forums is for that particular region to articulate the issues for them, the challenges, but also the solutions tangible for their communities that they want to work on and help to implement. And I will say to you very strongly that young people are really important drivers of the agenda in those regional areas. And a lot of the ideas that come through, they come through to individual ministers, depending on the flavour of the challenge and the identified solutions. They come through to us for further consideration. And then, of course, through budget processes, we address those, or we seek to. So that is a very, very strong and very strong platform for a lot of young people that have, and they've utilised that very, very well to date.
Thank you, Minister. And just one more question from me before we let you go into more important things that I'm sure you have for today. there are many advocates that see behavioral change as the way forward. If you do the right thing and your neighbor does the right thing and the neighbor, then things will be much better. But I am of the ones that think that systemic change needs to happen and needs to be led politically by our political leaders. And over the last decade, we've seen a backlash, a rise of populism and really conservative policies, not only in the climate arena, but socially speaking. But on the other hand, and a strong lack of trust of citizens of their own politicians happening worldwide, not just in Australia, federally or regionally. But on the other hand, we've seen the emergence of new, strong, young female politicians, like Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, the Prime Minister of Finland, the new Greens candidate in Germany that's going to compete the election. So what is your view about politicians reconnecting with their citizenry and making that connection for that systemic change that is needed? And you cannot put all the responsibility on individual behavioral change. There needs to be, in my opinion, that systemic change led by politicians. How do you recover that trust from the people and support the policies that you're interested in pursuing?
You're absolutely correct. It is incumbent on all of us who are elected to stay connected. I cannot, in all good conscience, claim to represent views of communities unless I remain connected. And politicians who don't remain connected in a broad sense with their broad communities become detached, develop tin ears to what the real issues are. And we've started us of the issue, but at a federal level, the last 2 months, the Commonwealth government has demonstrated that it now can only overcome
Minister, I think we've
goodness, and politicians are not connected, then they're connected. And it doesn't mean that you only lost a view. I'm sorry, am I back on?
Yes, you're back on. I'm sorry, we lost you there for a minute.
Okay, I apologize. Well, look, if we're not going to be part of the solution and do our job, and our basic job is to stay connected, to communicate with people, it's not about just being the conversation. And if you're not prepared to do that, then you should get out of the way. We don't need politicians like that. We need politicians who can explain a situation, that can listen and garner support and be able to move forward together and not leave people behind, either leaving people behind by failing to act on climate change or any other matter that is of global importance as we are facing now.
Thank you so much, Minister, for sharing an hour of your time. As I said at the beginning, it's very important for us in this summit to have your presence and your views shared today. So on behalf of Future Earth Australia, the Western Sydney University and the University of Sydney, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
So we'll reconvene in 20 minutes at 11 for our first session of the day. So we'll see you back at 11. Thank you, everyone.